It was almost, it looked like it was mud. I don't know what it was. It was a flying saucer or what it was. It wasn't an airplane. It was not an airplane. It was down awfully low.
You're listening to Pursuit of the Paranormal podcast with your hosts, Ash Ellis and Greg Tomlinson.
Hey Ash, how's it going?
Good, Greg. Good evening. Pretty late on for us, more than usual.
Yeah.
Usually, the case when we have an American guest on. So yeah, a little bit late in the evening for us. But how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Looking forward to the conversation tonight. This person we're going to speak to today is someone who has, since a child, been programmed at a psychiatric hospital for secret projects. And we're going to talk through some of the experience she's had that hopefully we'll talk about the covert nature of the program, such as MK Ultra, systematic torture, sexual manipulation, training, and psychological abuse. So, little trigger warning straight away. If any of these subjects might not be to your taste, which is something we don't normally go on the podcast, feel free to not listen. I get that completely. But hopefully those of you that do listen are going to have a good conversation. So welcome along, Olivia.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I hope I've done that intro done it justice, what we might be talking about.
Sure, yeah.
Yep.
We'll get into it more.
Yeah. So I think initially it will be interesting to, I mentioned right at the start that a child being programmed at a psychiatric hospital for secret projects. Not something I expected to say on a podcast episode, I'll be completely honest. So do you want to take us right back to the start?
Yeah, I do. I usually like to start with kind of like the origin of it and going back to my family members, because that's really how I got into the program. So that's kind of where I like to start.
So is it like a generational thing? Is it like...
Yeah, yes, I believe in a bit. It is something similar to that, just because of the way I was introduced to the programs.
Cool. Yeah, far away.
Okay. So I usually always start when I'm talking about this saying that I had very interesting parents. So my father was in military intelligence. He was recruited at a very young age, right out of high school, to go to the Russian-German border where he was a code breaker. So, and he learned German probably in 6 months. So he was, doing that intelligence work. And when he came out of the military, he ended up getting involved in what a lot of people consider major drug trafficking. So the drug trafficking in the 60s and the 70s, if anybody does research, they were involved in what we consider some of these, we call them 3-letter agencies here. We don't usually say the title out loud, but if people research, it's very easy to find. So there was a lot of that interaction, interconnectedness between the agencies and drug trafficking way back in the 60s and 70s already. And he started working with what we now call cartels. And in that time, they didn't necessarily call them cartels, but they were kind of like organized crime type syndicates. So now they call them cartels. So I usually describe it like that just because it's easier for people to understand. So he started working for these cartels, and he was a pilot. He used a boat, he used a car, they used even bus. My mom, she helped him a lot. My mother helped him a lot doing that type of work, and they were making quite a bit of money for very young people, lots and lots of money. And what the problem was is after a while of doing this and doing very well, I mean, obviously there was a lot of danger, they kind of get addicted to that type of dangerous lifestyle and the things that go along with it, the money and the drama and all that. But he ended up getting addicted to his own product. So, and he was trafficking large amounts of heroin into the country. So when he got addicted to his own product, he started to become very unreliable to these major, agencies and things that were relying on him to do this and to bring, drugs into America. And so they started to kind of try to, warn him in a way by doing what we call raids. So they, the police would, come and say, break down the door and, rush in and try to see what he had. So they did one at first just to kind of scare him. That one didn't work. because he didn't get off the drugs. Obviously, if anybody knows about addiction, it's very difficult. So they ended up doing a second raid, and they ended up taking him straight to jail. And he was looking at life in prison during that time. And there was a huge public trial. And what ended up happening after it looked like he was going to go to prison for life, but at the end of the trial, they just dropped all of the charges, and they said that they had the wrong person, and they ended up giving him a local government job. So they hired a known drug trafficker and heroin addict for that. So it's very strange to see that he went through all that, and at the end of all this, they just said, "Never mind. You're set free," after the public trials and everything. It was really crazy to see. But I was very young at that age. I was just a baby when that happened. But what I've learned is that the reason why he was able to escape that life is because he had to offer them something, in an exchange for his own life. And he did. He offered me, he let them use me for whatever they wanted in order to stay out of prison, because he was a coward. He couldn't see himself going to prison for that long. So he sacrificed that. And, it was I'm sure it was, I don't know. I can't say it was difficult for him just because I know him, and I knew him anyway. He's passed away now, but maybe he thought he was doing something good. So what I think is really interesting is that when I was able to expand on my abilities, I started learning about what I could do about 4 years ago in terms of remote viewing and bilocation, astral travel, and an ability I call hosting. And actually, it was an entity, a dark entity, that taught me that word. They told me what I do is called hosting, because a lot of people describe it as like a trance channeling, and I think it's similar to that, but it was spirits and entities that told me that I'm something called a host. So I call it hosting. It's my term that I use because that's what they told me I do. And I also say psi remote viewing. I don't just say remote viewing because I'm not using a scientific process or coordinates. It's a real psychic ability that's pulling me towards these different areas, dimensions, realities, all these things that I've seen and able to get information on it is because of these abilities that I was able to find that I had. So when I was able to figure out that I was doing this, I was able to actually host, which means hosting means I let something take over my body completely. It is a form of voluntary possession. So, and I don't recommend it to other people to try it. Don't do that. Don't try this at home. So I can do this, and I'm not harmed physically or psychologically by this. It's an ability that I have particularly. So I can allow people to possess me and let them use my body to speak and to step back in this world. So I'm doing that a lot with spirits, discarnates, entities, aliens, humans, even animals. I've done it with animals even. So it's really interesting to be able to do that. So this is how I got so much information about my father, is because of this ability. I let him come into my body and use me to speak. And this is how I found all the information and how he actually felt during the time that he was alive, and about the situation that happened. And, you know, he felt like, and when he came to speak through me, he gave me a gift of speaking in his own, earth voice, the way he was when he was a human. Because he doesn't say he's a human now. He says he's in a different dimension, and he doesn't have the same feelings because he's not human anymore. So when he said he brings that human side to give me a gift to know the truth. And I appreciate it, even though it's harsh in the way he speaks about me was, it's very sad, the things that he thought, but I'm glad that he did it because I needed the truth more than I needed anything else.
So just to go back, just to, I guess, for a bit of clarification. So when your dad was doing this drug trafficking in the 60s and 70s, was he still working for the agency?
Yes.
Like kind of like a secret.
They never really let you go. The agencies don't, in my opinion. Like, from what I've seen, a lot of people, even if you're released from an agency, you're still under monitoring and control based on the amount of information that you have or what you've done in the past. You're always have almost like this type of agreement that you can't speak, about the things that have happened and things like that. That's what it's supposed to be like. Not that that happens, but it's always kind of like a certain level of monitoring.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. So he, like you say, so he basically has a plea bargain, I guess, to
Yes.
what gave you up. Well, gave you
Yes.
all over to them to do what they wanted to do to you.
Yes. And he told me that his spirit told me that he knew what they were doing, but that when I was at home, that he couldn't tell there was anything wrong with me because I didn't have any emotion. And he didn't realize that was because of what they did to us, that we weren't able to have a lot of emotion. We weren't able to do a lot of speaking and things like that. It's because of what happened, in the MK Ultra. I was going to talk about a little bit about the actual MK Ultra experience at the psychiatric hospital because I think that's important for people to know that that really happens to people. Children get taken. I remember being taken in a van to a psychiatric hospital, and I don't know how. This is what is really strange to me. I don't know how my parents either didn't know or knew and just kind of pushed it to the back of their minds that I was gone for a certain amount of time. They never really talked about it. I have asked my mother, who's still alive, if she remembers me leaving at night when I was a little kid. The only thing she says is maybe. She can't be for sure. So it's really hard to get that answer from them. Um, when I speak to my father's spirit, he says he knew. He knew, he did whatever they said. He said there was no room to question these types of people. He said you are not allowed to question them. He said when he did that, he saved the whole family by letting me be taken. He said he saved everyone.
So just staying at that sort of time period then. So they would come for you in like at night time, take you away. How were you? How, like what happened the first time? 'Cause I find that fascinating.
Yes.
Obviously, I can imagine your dad's obviously turned a bit of a blind eye at one point right at the start, but it must be quite a difficult thing for him to do anyway. But also, how did you feel that sort of the first times that
Yes.
happened?
So when I went to the psychiatric hospital, for me it was when I first saw the programmer who was a woman. So we usually don't hear a lot about women, being involved in MK Ultra and things. It was an older woman. She was, and I didn't grow up with people like her because we had grown up so poor around, drugs and things like that. I didn't grow up with people like her. So she looked very ethereal to me when I saw her. She was always very well dressed and very put together, her appearance and things. It was really strange to see her. So it was just me and one other child because it was a special program. So it was just me and this other child named Jacob in one wing of this psychiatric hospital. And this psychiatric hospital was huge. It was massive. They had underground tunnels there. They were their own self-sustaining buildings. They didn't need a lot of outside assistance to keep running. So it was a perfect scenario and place for them to conduct these type of experiments. So they had a small wing where they had just me and this child. And the coordinator, she had two, what we used to call orderlies. Now they call them nurses. There was two males that helped her with this work. And they were, trained in certain ways. They were the ones that did most of the physical and sexual abuse. The doctor, she would give us the chemicals, hypnosis, and electroshock, things like that. They were doing a lot of experimenting with this. So it was just me and this other boy. And then we were usually a lot of this activity was taking place in a room we called the playroom. And it looked exactly like a child's playroom. There was some toys there, books, different places where we could watch cartoons and things like that. So they were trying to practice something called systematic abuse, but at the same time, their end goal was something they wanted to achieve called syncopated dissociation. What they wanted was for me and this child to be able to dissociate at the same time. They wanted to see what would happen, what is the possibility of something like that. So they would administer LSD, like we were on a lot of drugs. They were doing electroshock therapy, like I said. And the systematic abuse was something akin to like a child's school program where they would change activities every 15 to 20 minutes. They would, do a physical harm, some psychological abuse, manipulation, and then mix in other activities that we were supposed to do by watching, scary images. There was a lot of things they did with lights and a lot of hypnosis. a lot of hypnosis. So I can see now that I'm so good at being in trance and, remote viewing and things, I can see how using hypnosis on us as a child was probably what made them think that I was, going to be really good at certain things because of what they found when they were doing that hypnosis. So I can understand that. So during the hypnosis, she would have me and Jacob go into her office. And once we were able to learn how to go in trance, she would be able to guide us she would have us put our palms up on the chairs, and she would put something like an acupuncture needle in the middle of our palm. And that was a definite trigger to go in trance. Very easy, very easy. And once you have that, knowledge and skill and ability to go in trance, it becomes quite easy. Like I usually can go into trance in about 10 seconds if I have the proper environment and everything's quiet. I'm able to do it pretty quickly. So I can see how they were able to learn about me and this child just doing that. So there was a lot of different, they were making us, eat, disgusting foods, a lot of slapping in the face, in the different parts of the body. Um, it would be constant. And so what they wanted to do is it was almost like being trained to be a soldier, even at age of 7, because they wanted us to get to a point where we don't ask for anything. You don't have to use the bathroom. You don't ask for food. You don't cry when you're being harmed. In any experience, you're just almost like a robot. So they're trying to break down the entire psyche of that child so they can rebuild it up. And what they did is actually made like these small holes or pockets in my own mind. And these are what they were building back up with either training, information, and now that I can see some of these altars, I've been able to go deep within the mind and see the altars that they created. And that's what they call these additional personalities. They call them altars. You can see these things are so real because it is real, because it is a part of you, but they're so advanced and complex. Some of these have created worlds within your own mind. So the complexity of the human mind is way more expansive than we've ever been able to realize. I've seen what's inside the mind, and it's massive. You can't it's so big you could probably not even reach the outer levels of what your mind really is. And I know that people talk about the matrix and they talk about an external, situation called the matrix, but when I was looking inside the mind, I saw it within the mind. It was an individualized thing. The matrix was inside the mind rather than an external process.
So these abilities, so they, as a result of the experiments, or do you think that you would have had some kind of innate ability either way?
I believe that the abilities were there. It's just this is what kind of cracked it open in a way. These, these behaviors, the situation is what made it to be what it was. And also, I didn't realize I could do any of this for my whole life until about 4 years ago. It's like I had forgotten it. You had been mind wiped and forgotten so much that once I started doing it again, it blows my mind every time that I do this. I still can't, sometimes I still can't believe that I can do the stuff I can do, because not many people can do this. And most people are afraid to go as far as I've been able to go. So I was going to talk about one of the things that they found and how they chose me for other programs is using hypnosis and hypnotic regression in the psychiatric hospital. They were able to go so deeply within our minds. They were able to see some of my past lives. And this is why they thought I was a good candidate for a lot of different programs. So I was going to talk about the past lives that they saw. So one of the lives that they saw and they wanted to utilize for their work is that I was a medium in the 1400s in Italy. So a psychic medium. So I was living in this small village, and a lot of the people, I was trying to help them, they had, relatives that had passed, or loved ones. I would try to help them and let them speak to those people or hear messages and things like that. And they would exchange with me, bring vegetables or whatever they had around the home. So I felt like I was doing a real service in that village. But the Inquisition started to come through. And one day these men came to my house and they just grabbed me, punched me in the face, dragged me off on a wagon to a dungeon. And in that dungeon, they did, a lot of torturous things. And one of the main torture methods I remember is that they hung me from a ceiling by my arms, and I didn't have any feeling left in the arms. And people think that everybody was burned at the stake. And I actually died in that life from dehydration and starvation. It wasn't from being burned or anything, or even the torture. It's just from not being fed or given any water. So that was one life that they saw that ability of being a psychic medium. It had already been there. And there was another life that they saw, and it was, I think, about late 1700s. And I was a male in that life. And I had been living on my own for a really long time. As a child, I had lost my parents very young. So I became something like a vagabond, a street kid kind of thing. So I would travel around, and just, pickpocketing or just stealing food, whatever I could do to stay alive. And I end up meeting another gentleman that had the same kind of darkness that I had in that life. And in that life, I guess we would be considered somebody that, harms and assaults, women. So it was me and another partner. We would do this all the time. We would go from village to village finding our victims. So we would assault them and just leave them. And then, we would assault them to the end without me saying, you know what I mean? So we would go from village to village doing this. And there was one time we finally, and we thought we were invincible because we were never getting caught. Nobody knew who we were because we traveled so often. They couldn't catch us. So we finally went to one village where we had attacked a woman and left her in the in the fields. We had left her there, and they found her so quickly though. And that was the bad thing, because we went to the pub to have a drink and we thought we were safe. We were laughing and giggling with the other villagers, but they knew it was us because there was no other new people in the village. We were the only suspects that they had. And so me and this other guy, we ended up, running to a barn as fast as we could. We thought we had gotten away, but they ended up locking us in there and setting the barn on fire. I only remember at the end that I was trying to crawl up, the rafters to get away from the heat and the smoke. And then we ended up dying, being burned alive, which we deserved based on, our behavior in that lifetime. So they did see that lifetime too as a killer in order to, make their evaluations on what they thought I could be in the future. And there was another life I saw, which was really important because they saw that I could be a slave. They saw that I could be, taken and used without complaint, is because it was in ancient times and all I saw was sand. And I was a male in that life, and there was sand everywhere. And there was people walking, humans walking everywhere, just moving sand with no eye contact. We weren't talking. I didn't see anybody eating or drinking. We were just walking and moving sand. And I looked over, and it was this giant, I called it a dog person. So it was a huge, almost looked like Anubis, the Egyptian character Anubis. That's what this thing looked like. And there was just one of them, and he was pretty much just watching us all do this work and move the sand for him. So this particular being, from what I know from the myth, I know our people thought that he came down and killed our god, because we said that our god was a crocodile and that these dog men came down and murdered our god. So that's how they were able to take over. And they were having us move all this sand because they were building some pyramids very quickly. They were calling it flash portals. Something about these pyramids were more than just a stone structure. They were trying to make them as an opening to other realities, and probably for themselves to come and move back and forth very quickly. So it was really interesting. The day that I was able to see this vision, it was my first hypnotic regression, I believe. And I was amazed that I was viewing this scene. And what I found interesting is that I was there. I was in that time period. I was there and I saw this being. And the only thing he said to me, he said, "Get back to work." He could see me in present time where he was, this dog man. It was so interesting and that's all he said. He's like, "I see what you're doing. Get back to work," kind of thing. No matter what life I was in, he's almost like he could sense my energy and told me, get back to work. Pretty much, I'm a slave, get back to work. So I ended up dying that in that life on the stairs, but they saw that I could be programmed in a way just because I was a slave in that life. And one of the most important lives that they saw, and which has been really impactful on me, is that I was this thing in ancient times, a thing. I called myself a thing. Like I saw it, and I saw myself following this man in a in like a dark desert. It was a man that had lost one of his sheep. He was trying to find it before it got too dark. And I could tell he was afraid because he was alone. It was so quiet in the desert. And I would just sneak up and, impress myself upon him, whisper in his ear. And he couldn't see me because I was invisible. He couldn't see what I was. So in that life, I was something that would be considered a dark jinn or a dark entity. People have different names for these things, demons, whatever they want to call them. That's was something I was in a past life, as this dark being. And I would find somebody, a prey, this is how we lived. I would find somebody, I would follow them, I would infiltrate their life. And then, I would start doing this stage of oppression where I would just constantly scare them and, say things in their ears, put images and messages in their mind. That's the process, of trying to break this person down to where the end goal would be I wanted him to let me take over his body. I wanted him to let me possess him fully. So when he would do that finally, then I could do the real work. And that would be I wanted to make sure that I would blow up his life. I would make him hurt himself or somebody else or just destroy his life completely. And that's pretty much what I considered my food. Is that's how we survived, is by doing this. We ate, it's almost like I ate this, I ate that energy of, controlling and, you know, taking over this person. We would do that. Was how I lived for thousands of years doing that. And it was a being named Harlowen. That's her name. She was Harlowen. She considered herself a dark jinn. She even says that her brothers are the jinn. So she knows that what she was in that life. And what I found interesting when I let her speak through me is that she didn't feel guilty. She didn't feel bad because she had been doing this for so long that some of these beings think that they're gods. They're not gods, but they think that in their mind because of the amount of worship and reverence they are given. They don't know that they're not gods, until somebody tells them, no, you're not, you're just, a thing. So she thought that she was doing something good. She didn't even know what the word evil was. She had no idea what that meant. She said, this is how I live. And I thought I was helping these people because, they wanted to experience darkness, and I brought that darkness experience to them. That's what she thinks in her mind. She thought that she was doing that what she's supposed to. So that's my role. And I think it's interesting that when people are talking about the demonic world and this particular entity, she did not like to travel physically. And a lot of them don't, because the physical form for a demon is very heavy, it's very dense. So they much rather travel as energy, just like I did as a jinn. I traveled as red energy. And a lot of times when we would infiltrate somebody's life, we would get inside them through the blood. So we're viral in nature. So I think that's really interesting to see, demonic as virus. That's how we traveled, is through the blood of the person.
Right.
So those were some of the lives that they saw through the hypnosis at the psychiatric hospital that made them choose me for some occult projects. And not a lot of people are, brought into the occult projects because it's very secret and people don't know that, there's various governments that are delving into these dark projects because what they know is that there is power there. There's power in the dark side and they want to have access to that power in some way. It's just difficult to reach it. So they're, definitely seeking out people that can reach those outer realms.
So just to sort of like bring it back to sort of like your childhood during this time. So you've witnessed all these past lives. You've witnessed and seen what you've been in the past and seen why
Mhm.
they're looking to choose you. What's going through your mind at this particular point? Because for roughly how old are you at that point?
7.
So that's a lot for an adult to take on board.
Mhm.
I can only imagine. So as a child, what are you thinking at this point? What have they
They got us.
told you exactly what's going on? Have they given
No.
you any idea? No.
No, and they got us to a point where we didn't think, and that's what they wanted. They called us both, me and this child Jacob, they called us prized pupils. They said everything they had done to us was a success. So they considered us, to be very favorable for different programs and projects because we survived. Most children can't survive the things that we're surviving in MK Ultra. So if somebody does survive, that means they're, well sought after for certain projects, because it's very difficult to survive that. You think about, the trauma that's placed on children. Most don't survive that. Most become very, I don't know, split, traumatized, PTSD. There's no way that a child can survive that. So for us to be able to survive and function is what they saw as like a huge advantage to their programs. And it was because we didn't talk. When we came back home, I didn't speak. I was very quiet. I never talked. I'm pretty sure they probably thought there was something wrong with me at that point, but it was just because we had learned to dissociate and run from the trauma, run from the physical, abuse in the body by dissociating. And actually, we learned how to leave the body during those experiences. So it was maybe the body was being harmed, but our spirit was able to leave the body.
So how long do you know like this went on for your
About
childhood?
6 months. The MK Ultra was about 6 months, and they said it was very quick because of how well we did. And then they were able to, you know, refer me out specifically. I don't know about Jacob, but they referred me out to a different program. So they took me to this gentleman's office, and it was an elderly gentleman. He was very frail, very balding, very skinny. He was wearing these small little wire rim glasses. He looked very old. I'm not sure if he was in his 80s or 90s, very, very elderly. But his name was Dr. Green. And I'm not quite sure about this, but other people say that a different name for Dr. Green is Mangala. I don't know for sure if that's real, but I only knew him as Dr. Green. So when they took me to his office, it didn't look like a hospital. It just looked like a business office, kind of like, I don't know how to explain it, but he had two people in his office, and it looked like they were twins. They had some type of albino condition, very light colored, and he told them to, I guess, give me some type of exam. So they start looking in my eyes and my ears and in my mouth. And when they looked in my mouth, they both turned to Dr. Green and said, "We can see the thing inside her." So what they thought they saw was, you know, they thought they had seen attachments. They thought that I had something like a demon attachment, something that had possessed me. But they were wrong, because they didn't see something separate from me. They were just seeing who I was, because I can't erase a lot of these past lives. It's going to be inside me at a cellular level, because you can't eliminate it no matter how much you try. I haven't been able to do that, nor I don't even think I would want to, just because the information is so important to me. So they saw this thing inside me. They saw my dark jinn self, but they thought it was an attachment. So they were wrong. So they started to do different experiments and things. There was one experiment where they had me in a specific type of like sensory deprivation, but it wasn't with water. It was just dark. And they had me sit in a room by myself, and it was dark, and there was no food. They didn't give me anything to eat or drink. They just hooked me up to an IV and made me sit there, because they wanted me to allow these beings to take over my body. And they were trying to make this into a scientific, almost measurable, you know examination, or whatever they wanted to do. So they would have me sit there and let the beings take over my body. And I found that really interesting, that these humans were torturing me for all this time, and it was entities, dark entities, that people call dark entities, that were keeping me alive, because they were, sustaining me, because these people weren't giving me food or anything. They sustained me during that time. And they would take, body measurements. They were checking body systems. And, there's probably a lot of research out there about, what kind of, collection of different bodily functions could they measure while I was doing that, things like that, trying to see, is it something separate from me? How did they harness that power of that dark energy that was inside me? They were trying a lot of different things to try to figure it out. So they ended up calling that Project Traveler. And that was based on the ability for me to be able to host other entities.
So, I mean, there's quite a lot. I know we're only kind of just getting started, and there's a lot to kind of take in. And obviously, what we're talking about is out there for a lot of people.
Mhm.
It's one of the the side of the sort of paranormal stuff that a lot of people find it hard to kind of accept or believe in. So I guess for me, with the, so we talk about the hosting side of things that you
Mhm.
can you've been able to kind of let these other people or creatures or entities whatever in and take over your body. Is that something that you can like kind of prove? Can people see you do that? Is that something that you can kind of show people?
For me, it's proven because I record everything I do with any type of person that helps me do this. And I have about, I don't know, probably 30 to 40 hours of recordings where I'm
Mhm.
doing this. So I prove it to myself. I don't necessarily feel like I have it to prove it to other people, nor do I think that they would be okay knowing and seeing it firsthand. I think it would scare them, more than they realize, to actually hear, what is really being said, because it's so different from what we've been taught, our whole lives, and our, different cultures have taught us to feel about certain beings. And so I myself, I grew up in the church. I'm not religious now. I'm more spiritual, but I remember myself, how we're taught to view these things. And a lot of people say that, it's all lies, they're lying to you and doing this and that. And it's just been, I've just had a different experience of it. It's just totally different from what, and they actually give me a lot of really good information that I provide to other people, in order to, show them that there are secret things that are happening in the world and how hidden the real world is.
So, so taking it back a little bit again. So you've been selected. You've done the hypnotic regression. You've seen why they've picked you. Can you talk about secret programs that you've had to go on or be involved in that were some of them off-world?
Yes.
What kind of missions did you have to do? Because I'm just aware that we could talk for hours and
Yes.
hours about
Yes.
this. I can see it, and I just want to make sure that we get the most information out of you, as it were, um, over over the time. So I think it would be quite a good point to sort of go directly into some of the missions that you were involved in. Because
Yeah,
I think
sure.
this we've, like I mentioned shortly before we started recording, that we have spoken to other people that have been involved in as being like off-world soldiers, that kind of thing. So it'll be interesting to see your experience and how that sort of goes
Yes.
with people we've spoken to before.
So I did a lot of what they were expecting me to do is more manipulation. I'm not, a lot of other secret space program individuals, they talk about the large military operations and, aliens and, battles and things. I wasn't involved in that. I was involved in the corporate sector. So they had trained me to be something called a personality profiler. They trained me on the moon when I was only 13 for personality profiling. So I was going to talk about how when I went there, I was just 13, and they usually didn't have very young people in these classes. It was specifically a psionics class that was being taught by a woman. And the way I got there, it's really strange because I had a chaperone since I was young. It was an older gentleman wearing a suit, and he took me on a train. And that's all I remember is seeing like a kind of like a subway area that we went on, and we were in this underground base. And on the base, what was so distinctive to me is I could look on the wall of the classroom that I was supposed to be assigned to, and I saw a poster on the wall, and it said there was a general named General Land, Land, and that he was retiring after 20 years of service, and they were having a banquet for him. So it's details like that that stick in my mind as like, you know, it's so hard to make this stuff up like on the spot constantly. That's why I think it, leads to a lot of validity in some of our testimonies, because of those details that we can remember, because it's very difficult to come up with stuff like that on the spot. And when I went to the moon, there was a woman teaching the class. There was several other people in the class, but they were adults. I was the youngest. She really didn't seem like she wanted me in the class. I'm not quite sure if she was used to dealing with children, but she was very hard with me, very stern. And I appreciate it now because I can see that she was trying to keep me alive. And I always remember the phrase she said. She always said, "It's you can only have one look or one word, and you need to know who these people are. You need to know what they're thinking. You need to know if they're dangerous. You need to know if there's a threat in the environment. It takes only one look." She was saying I had to be so quick. It would take a stare from somebody, one handshake, one piece of their body movement. I had to know what was going on with them. So it was a lot of pressure, but at the same time, I see she trained me very well in trying to learn some of those things that I needed. They had me doing for a while a lot of beta, what I call beta tracking work, and that's pretty much an agency, private agency, and where none of us were compensated from this, and you're pretty much forced. It's like modern slavery. You don't get compensated, you're just forced to do this work. So it's nothing that I wanted to do. This was all by force and threat and intimidation. They had us do so. If they would tell me to get into a relationship, I would have to. If they would tell me there's this person, we need you to be his girlfriend, I would have to do that, because a lot of it was about intelligence gathering. Because some of those altars that they created in the playroom way back when, some of them had photographic memory. They always have one that has a photographic memory. So all I had to do was pretty much just hang out with somebody, and the mind records, the subconscious records, and you can't get at that information. It's very tightly sealed because it would take somebody that knew how to do a specific type of hypnosis or trance to obtain that information that's hidden way back in my mind. It's almost like getting a debriefing, but they would have to use that psychological process to obtain it. It's not just sitting at the front of our minds like a regular memory. That's not there. You'd have to go very deep to get that information. So they had me doing a lot of work like that, intelligence gathering, being involved with people. And there were other things, darker things that they wanted me to do. Some of it's in my book if people wanted to look into it. It's just, if you can expand your imagination. If I say there were darker things that they want me to do with these gentlemen, it wasn't not pleasant. So they would have me do that, and then after doing that for quite some time, I believe I was transferred and given a promotion because they said I did for a job well done. They wanted to give me a promotion, and then they transferred me to a base on Mars. And the particular base that I was on, it was called the McCreary base, and it was in the South Canal region of this planet. And it was just one base. There were several bases, but the particular base I lived on, it was because I was under the Mars Defense Force, and we call that MDF. And I was under the Ground Force Battalion, and my division was called Mariner. So I was in that corporate sector of that particular base. And what I was doing is there was new recruits coming in. So I was the personality profiler. They would schedule an appointment with me. They would come to my office. I'd spend upwards about an hour with them doing my evaluations, just based on when somebody's speaking, all I have to do is listen and watch. You can obtain their entire personality just by listening. It's really strange that even in between the sentences that people speak, you can obtain information about that person. It's almost like an advanced form of energy reading. So I was doing that, and once I was evaluating the person, I would make a recommendation for what job I would think that they'd be good for. And I send my recommendations up. The general that I worked under, his name was General Asher. And his office was kind of right by mine. He had glass windows in his office, and there was a secretary at the front door. I stayed in my office all the time. They didn't want me to interact with a lot of other people on the base. I think they thought it would impact my ability, and it probably would have. So I was very kind of like isolated and alone. And, and a lot of the normal people that were in like the military groups, it's not like they would hang out with corporate individuals anyway. So we were doing a lot of that work on there. And I did that all the way up until I ended up having an episode where this was really interesting. My programming started to break down later in my term of service. I did a full term of service around, I believe it was 19 to 39 years old. I did about a 20-year term of service. So towards the end of my service, I was starting to break down in my mind. I was starting to have bleed through memories of a different life. And I had been mind wiped so completely and shifted into different back and forth into different altars that I had no idea what was happening. It was impacting my emotional state and my emotional stability every single day. And I was doing things where I was sneaking into my boss's office, looking through his office papers and things, just because I felt like something was missing or something was happening and I couldn't put my finger on it. So I ended up getting demoted because it was impacting the work I was doing. I wasn't doing it properly. So they sent me out to work as a liaison for incoming ships, was very easy work. You just signed off on papers. And then for a short time, I was on a medical satellite station where I was almost something like a medical social worker. So if somebody were there to have some type of surgery, augmentation, or other type of, you know, experimental type surgery, things like that, I would have to get them to sign their consent because consenting and signatures is very big in the base I was at. I can't speak for other groups, but under MDF, they wanted signatures for everything. And from what the handlers, when I'm letting them speak through me, they're saying that's because the signatures can still hold up in court. So if we were to have some type of class action suit or anything, they have signatures saying that we consented to everything they did to us, no matter what it was. There's signatures everywhere. Even when I was in MK Ultra, they have a signature from my own father saying take her. So it's really interesting how they still do that. They still maintain that we're consenting to these, to these acts by forcing us to sign things. Because you really don't have a choice. When they said, "Do you want to sign this?" You can't, if you're in the military, you can't say no, I don't think I want to sign this. That's not an option. Yes, you are required to sign everything that's put in front of you. And there's so much paperwork most of the time because I was one of the people that had to have people sign things. That was part of my job. I know that most of them weren't looking at it really. They weren't reading it. They just knew signatures on everything. Had to. So there's signatures from everyone consenting to these behaviors.
So, did you get a feeling that you were working for a three-letter agency,
Oh yeah, of course.
the military, or some other kind of like special access program that was sort of above the government? Because obviously, this kind of stuff that you're off-world, um, that's the kind of stuff you don't necessarily think that the three-letter agencies or the military as a front
They're all
are involved in.
directly involved. They are a private military. They are private military groups, and there's private mercenary groups too that utilize all these children as adults or as children to do this work. Private military, private mercenary groups, three-letter agencies, all of them are doing that, and they're all in cahoots, or they're all in a battle for who can have the most power and control, and all in the name of conquest. A lot of these people are doing these things in the name of conquest and power.
So what is the end goal for these programs? Because obviously there's only so much on-world stuff that they can control. If they're controlling people and can take children and completely sort of change your whole being and your mind, what is the ultimate goal?
Power
Because
and
if they're off
conquest, power
of
of
who,
everything.
everybody.
This world and the next. Power. That's what they're fighting over, power. And I don't know, a lot of beings that speak through me saying their time of power is near to end. That's what they told me, that a lot of things are shifting and we're being allowed to talk because it's time for them to step down. They've been in power too long and they're scared, they're in fear of the end of it. And they're going to be scrambling a lot and targeting a lot of people because of that. They don't want that to end. It's almost like they can see their own demise happening.
So is that you said it's only a few years ago when you started kind of knowing that this
Yeah,
is what has
about
been
4
going on.
years. Yeah, about 4 years.
So
I
how
wrote
did
2 books in that time too.
awesome. So how that kind of feel when you kind of realized all this? Did it make sense? Did you think
No,
did you know something had been going on or
it didn't make okay, so the reason why I was able to start remembering is that it's really strange because I had always had a strange life, always had paranormal things happening to me, and I was terrified of everything. I just felt like a very a mousy type person, very afraid of everything, like a little mouse, like scared of everything. And I had no idea what was wrong with me. I knew there was something wrong with me. I'd always known there was something wrong with me. I just couldn't put my finger on it. I spent a lot of time throughout, my younger years being in different altars. So when different personalities are taking over, my real self was pushed, far back and let these other personalities take over and live life, you know. And that can be very draining because some are not, they are not as rational as me. They are not, the way I speak, that's not the way they act. And, I spent a lot of time like just being very manipulative and, in intimate relationships and in other scenarios, I used a lot of that manipulation in my life because that's how I had been trained for so long, is to be to be what other people want me to be. That's what I used to do. They wanted a certain person. I would try to make myself into that person because that was the job. That was always the job. And it almost felt like I was always working because I didn't have my front personality. My real self had been gone for so long. I didn't know how to act. And when I did find my real self, it's just a constant learning process. Like I'm still learning because it's only been about 4 years. So I'm still learning about my original self. And what is really strange is that because of this, because I haven't been able to eliminate some of these abilities that they created, like personality profiling, I don't think people realize how much freedom there is in not being able to know and judge every thought that comes into your mind. Because if I people quickly, I can profile myself. So it's not fun to, if I'm thinking about, maybe I'm going to start an argument with something, to know the fact that I'm starting it and thinking about it ahead of time. There's way more premeditated thought than we realize as humans. Way more. We're just not realizing that most of it is premeditated. We think that, it's an instant thing and then we didn't mean it. I didn't mean it. Sometimes you probably did. It's just that I can see it and it's not fun. So it makes you kind of isolate yourself if you have that ability, because it's like, oh, I know why somebody's doing this. I know why you said that. I know why you did this certain behavior. It's just not a fun thing to have. That's one ability that I probably, it would be nice to eliminate that just because I don't want to know everything. Some people have freedom of just living a normal life and not having the thought of knowing everything, every reason why somebody says something. It gets to be too much. But the reason why I started to remember is I ended up getting a job that was exactly like something I was doing on Mars. And that's what happened. And that's why I started to have memories. And it was causing a lot of anxiety and it was causing a lot of panic almost. And it was really strange to be panicky in an office environment. That's not a normal thing to do in a situation like that. But it was because I was having memories of that old life bleeding through. It was just starting to almost like a ghost in the room, constantly, remembering things. I was getting huge chunks of information where I had no idea where, things like military codes and, you know, I've seen so many files probably over my lifetime being in that job that I was seeing names and codes and things that I had no idea what it meant. I was getting a lot of different entities trying to reach out to me. Once I started hypnotic regression, I had opened myself up so far and wide. It was just they were constantly trying to chat with me or reach out to me. And like I said, I was terrified because I didn't know. I was just like everybody else. I'm terrified of entities and, I watch movies. I know what happens, I think it's because of those movies I was kind of, because they do use scary movies to program you in MK Ultra too. They make it seem like part of you. Like for a reason for example, I have one altar named Ariel, and I consider this to be my survival altar. But this altar to me is terrifying. And she's been around so long, all the way back from the playroom is when she was created. And she always presents herself as this little girl that's possessed. Imagine like a possessed child in the way they look, wearing a dirty nightgown with their hair covering her face, just terrifying. And that's somebody that I had always seen since I was a child, but I thought it was like a demon. And it's really strange to see that I was afraid of the dark for my whole life. I sleep with the lights on. And I was always afraid of this little girl because sometimes she would come and like sit on my chest and hold me down and just smile in my face and I couldn't move. And it was terrifying. But I realized that the main thing that I was afraid of is I was afraid of myself because She is me. She was a part of me. She was that survival altar that had been created in the playroom. So my whole life I was scared of myself. And it was really eye-opening to realize that this demon that I thought that was following was actually part of my own personality. And their survival altar, while she only appears now that I know who she is, she mainly appears when there's some type of threat in my environment. So if I see her seep into my subconscious or a dream, I know I have to start watching my surroundings and looking around. She wouldn't show up unless there was something to protect because she is a survival altar. So if she has to come out, nothing else survives but me. That's only for the most dire circumstances, like if I was kidnapped or, something like that. That's when she would try to take over. So imagine having that like in your, psyche somewhere, all these different, almost like personalities, but they're
Mm.
I consider them people because they have their own lives in a way. In the mind, they feel like they're, real people. And sometimes when they take over, they can. I haven't had a takeover in a really long time because I'm able to counteract that now that I have these abilities. I'm able to find sometimes codes or phrases that can put them back to sleep. I ended up using hypnotic regression to put all these altars in retirement because they're not needed anymore. So I have to work on more my front personality and being able to have my front past personality acclimated to my current situation. So that's kind of how I started to have memories, is from a particular job. And it just expanded from there. And I started doing it more and more, and learning more about myself through these different hypnotic regressions.
So, I mean, that's obviously a lot to take in once you start kind of opening up and uh, finding all this out about yourself. So why did you make the decision to kind of go public with it? Obviously, it's a lot for a person to take in, even more so for other people to kind of sort of read it and hear about it. So, what kind of pushed that decision to do the podcast, do the books, to kind of go public with it?
I guess I feel like, for one thing, it was a message from my own father, who, like I said, who's been dead for a really long time. He told me in an, when I let him take over my body, he spoke through me and he told me to burn the system down. He said, burn it down. He said, go out and tell everybody what they did to us and what they made us do. So it's almost like I'm following, his, last wish or whatever. He told me to tell the world kind of what they're doing to people and what they have done. And I try to stay true to that as best I can by doing this information, giving this information out constantly to people. It's kind of like the mission now is for disclosure, to make sure people know that this actually happens to people. And they're still doing this to people. And it has to be, it's a modern slavery, the way they're doing these things to people. And I know it can be very unbelievable. A lot of parts of the story unbelievable, and it was like that for me too. I was kind of, if I wouldn't be human if I didn't question it myself at the beginning. I
Mm.
wouldn't be. So I did. I was like, okay, I'm just completely insane. Even though I was very rational, very educated, had a very professional job, I felt like, okay, I'm literally probably going insane at this point because this is not like me. I just don't understand. But the more I worked on it and the more, and I feel like the books were very healing. I was able to put it all out there without censoring a lot of it and let it just sit there. And I'm like, it helped me kind of cope with, the things that happened. And honestly, because of MK Ultra and because of what they did to us, I personally don't have a lot of emotion attached when I speak about these things and speak about these very dark things. I don't have a lot of emotion, and that's because of MK Ultra. One of the main things that we have to work on as victims of this is bringing back some of that emotion. Raw emotion for me was something that was taken away from me. So I have to learn how to do that now and be more emotional. I consider, some people don't like to be emotional. I consider it a gift now if I have emotion. But before, when I was younger, it would hurt me to have an emotion. I would feel like anxious and stressed out and almost like in pain just to have emotion. Like I hate it because the programmers didn't want you to have emotion, because that can put you in a threatening situation if you're crying or anxious and then you're going and doing some very dangerous corporate espionage work and you're looking like you're scared. That's already a sign that you're somebody that can't be trusted. So you can't do that. They had to like breed that out of us to where you don't show emotion, and that way you can get in and get out of these situations quite easily. If they send me on a job that's dangerous, I have to be able to get in and out with no emotion and do whatever they say. Or if they're making us do something that if we were to harm someone, they don't want you to show emotion. They don't want you to have guilt for that. They totally breed that out of you. So it's been a process trying to get all this emotion back after that was taken from me.
So your first book is called Grey Mouse, Sex, Space, and Mind Control. So the title Grey Mouse, you did mention a mouse not too
Yes.
long ago. Give us kind of a bit of into the title, what that's kind of like, why
Yes.
Grey Mouse?
Gray Mouse is actually an altar of mine that I had in its programming. This Gray Mouse altar was specifically used for corporate espionage. So there's a lot of agencies that they had me, kind of almost it would be any role they wanted me to take. If they wanted me to be a cleaner in a building, I'd be a cleaner. If they wanted me to be, working near the building, anything they wanted, I would turn myself into that thing, whatever it was. And they wanted you to be undetectable. They didn't want people to recognize that you could be somewhat of a threat to them, because honestly, as the gray mouse, no one would ever know that I was the one doing anything. If I went into this big company and was, cleaning their office, they would never ever realize that somebody like me would be the person that was taking their information or stealing it or changing it. They'd never even realize it. So that's part of why they did this to me. They almost made me, and I still feel that, gray mouse thing. I had a phobia of mice my whole life. I still do. I get very triggered by images of mice, anything that has to do with mice. If someone starts talking about mice, it could be, and it doesn't happen every time, but it could just be a random time someone's talking about a mouse. I could have an altar take over. My altar would take over. And then I would be very panicked and very nervous because gray mouse means work. I'd have to get into position where I'm getting ready for a job, and it's very, might be a dangerous job. So it gives me anxiety and stress to even hear about mice or a situation about a mouse, because it's so wrapped up in some of that work I used to do. So the gray mouse term has become like very important for me in terms of like who they tried to make me be, that gray mouse.
So your book's on Amazon. Is there anywhere else kind of people can find a bit more information about you, and
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
word trying to get out?
Yeah, Instagram and TikTok. I'm making a lot of videos about, the actual information. So not everybody is a reader. So there's other forms of media where you can obtain the information. And I go pretty in depth with a lot of those videos. So if somebody wanted to look on TikTok or Instagram, it's Olivia James, the Gray Mouse. They can find it pretty easy.
A lot to absorb. I'll obviously be checking out your TikTok as well, because that's something that we've recently got into. So
Yeah.
it'll be great to view some of your stuff on there. But I think we probably need to talk to you again in a bit more detail
Oh, I'd love
about
to.
some
Yeah,
other.
I'd love to.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you for coming on. We'll put all the links etc. on our show notes as we normally do, and I just thank you for being open and honest with us on this podcast. I'm sure our listeners will take a lot from what is essentially a subject that we don't touch on massively, although we
Mhm.
have talked off-world soldiers, etc. before. So yeah, absolutely fascinating to listen to you
Yeah,
talk. So
I'd love to be back and we can go into the definite details of what these actual entities are actually saying, because it's quite different from what we probably think. It's very interesting to hear them speak straight from the dark side.
Thanks for listening to Pursuit of the Paranormal, title music created by Steve Yarwood and Ambiinfinity. If you like the show, please follow us on Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, X, and Instagram. And if you really like the show, please rate and review the show wherever you are listening. It really does help. See you next time, and until then, stay weird. Thanks for listening to Pursuit of the Paranormal with